What if I told you that hidden within classified documents, sealed court files, and confidential testimonies lies a network so powerful, so deeply embedded in the highest echelons of American society, that its exposure could shake the very foundations of global power? What if the names you're about to hear include presidents, princes, tech billionaires, Hollywood moguls, and some of the most influential figures who shape our world today? This isn't conspiracy theory. This isn't speculation. This is documented, verified, and terrifyingly real. Welcome to the most disturbing investigation of our lifetime, the Jeffrey Epstein Files. And I warn you, once you know what's in these documents, you'll never see the world the same way again. Before we dive deep into this rabbit hole that goes further than you could ever imagine, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what I'm about to reveal has been suppressed, censored, and actively hidden from the public eye. We're going to connect dots that powerful people never wanted connected. We're going to name names that were meant to stay buried. And we're going to expose a system of corruption that reaches into every corner of influence in America and beyond. Jeffrey Epstein. The name itself has become synonymous with everything dark and sinister in modern America. But who was he really? Born in Brooklyn, New York in 1953, Epstein's rise from a relatively modest background to becoming a billionaire financier with connections to the world's most powerful people is a story that doesn't add up, and that's exactly the point. Epstein's wealth, his properties, his influence, none of it follows a logical trajectory. He dropped out of college, taught calculus and physics at the prestigious Dalton School in Manhattan, despite lacking proper credentials, and then somehow catapulted into the world of high finance. His first major break came when he joined Bear Stearns, the investment bank, in 1976. But here's where things get strange. Epstein was fired from Bear Stearns in 1981, reportedly for violations. Yet somehow, just 1 year later, he founded his own financial management firm, J. Epstein & Company, and claimed to only work with billionaires. But no one could ever verify who his actual clients were. Former business associates, investigators, and journalists who've spent years trying to trace Epstein's money have hit wall after wall. His wealth appeared almost out of nowhere, and his client list remained one of the most closely guarded secrets in finance. What we do know is that Epstein owned a private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands, known locally as Little St. James, but referred to by many as Pedophile Island. He owned a massive mansion in Manhattan, one of the largest private residences in New York City. He had estates in Palm Beach, Florida, a ranch in New Mexico, and an apartment in Paris. He owned a Boeing 727 jet, which flight logs reveal made hundreds of trips, carrying an astonishing roster of famous passengers. This wasn't just wealth, this was strategic positioning. Epstein placed himself at the intersection of power, influence, money, and secrecy. But Epstein wasn't just collecting powerful friends for social climbing. Evidence suggests he was collecting leverage. His homes were reportedly equipped with hidden cameras, recording devices in bedrooms, bathrooms, and private areas. According to testimony from victims and former employees, Epstein didn't just commit crimes, he documented them. He created an insurance policy of blackmail material on some of the most powerful men in the world. And that, more than anything else, explains why Jeffrey Epstein operated with impunity for decades.
Let's talk about the connections that make this story so explosive. These aren't casual acquaintances or people who met Epstein once at a party. These are documented, repeated, and in some cases, decades-long relationships with some of the most influential figures on the planet. First, let's address Prince Andrew, the Duke of York and son of Queen Elizabeth II. Court documents, photographs, and witness testimony place Prince Andrew on Epstein's island, at Epstein's mansion, and in the company of Virginia Giuffre, who testified under oath that she was trafficked to Prince Andrew when she was just 17 years old. The famous photograph of Prince Andrew with his arm around Virginia Giuffre with Ghislaine Maxwell smiling in the background has become one of the most damning images in this entire scandal. Despite Prince Andrew's disastrous BBC interview, where he claimed he couldn't have been with Giuffre on the night in question because he was at Pizza Express in Woking, a claim that was widely mocked, and his bizarre assertion that he couldn't sweat due to an adrenaline overdose in the Falklands War, the evidence against him remained overwhelming. In 2022, Prince Andrew settled a civil lawsuit with Virginia Giuffre for an undisclosed sum, reportedly in the millions. He was stripped of his military titles and royal patronages by the Queen herself. Then there's Bill Clinton, the 42nd President of the United States. Flight logs from Epstein's private jet show that Clinton flew on the Lolita Express, as it became known, at least 26 times, though some reports suggest the number could be higher. Clinton visited Epstein's island, traveled internationally with him, and maintained a relationship with Epstein well after Epstein's first conviction for soliciting prostitution from a minor in 2008. Clinton's spokesperson has repeatedly denied any knowledge of Epstein's crimes and claimed the flights were related to Clinton Foundation work in Africa. But testimony from victims, crew members, and witnesses paint a different picture. One of Clinton being fully aware of the young women who were constantly present around Epstein. The connections don't stop there. Les Wexner, the billionaire founder of Victoria's Secret and The Limited, was perhaps Epstein's most important financial connection. Wexner gave Epstein unprecedented power of attorney over his finances, allowed Epstein to live in his New York mansion, and entrusted him with managing hundreds of millions of dollars. The relationship between Wexner and Epstein has never been fully explained. How did a man with no verified financial expertise gain such total control over a billionaire's fortune? And why did Wexner, after Epstein's arrest, claim he had no knowledge of Epstein's crimes despite their incredibly close personal and financial relationship spanning decades? Harvard University professor Alan Dershowitz, the famous attorney who defended O.J. Simpson and was part of Epstein's legal defense team, has been accused by Virginia Giuffre of sexual abuse. Dershowitz vehemently denies these allegations and has sued Giuffre for defamation, while she has countersued. The legal battles continue, but what's undeniable is Dershowitz's role in securing Epstein's sweetheart plea deal in 2008, an agreement so favorable to Epstein that it has become a case study in how wealth and connections can corrupt the justice system. Kevin Spacey, the Oscar-winning actor, flew on Epstein's plane. Chris Tucker, the comedian and actor, was on the flight logs. Naomi Campbell, the supermodel, attended parties at Epstein's properties. Ehud Barak, the former Prime Minister of Israel, was photographed entering Epstein's Manhattan mansion and later admitted to visiting Epstein numerous times, but claimed it was for business purposes related to a tech startup. And perhaps most controversially, Donald Trump. Epstein and Trump were members of the same exclusive social circles in Palm Beach and New York throughout the 1980s and 1990s. There are photographs of them together at Mar-a-Lago. In a 2002 interview with New York Magazine, Trump called Epstein a terrific guy and noted that Epstein likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side. Court documents from 2016 included allegations against Trump related to Epstein, though those allegations were later withdrawn, and Trump has categorically denied any wrongdoing. Trump's supporters point out that he banned Epstein from Mar-a-Lago, reportedly after Epstein made inappropriate advances toward a member's daughter, and that Trump was one of the only high-profile figures to cooperate with prosecutors investigating Epstein in 2009. What makes all of these connections so disturbing isn't just that these powerful men knew Epstein, it's that they maintained relationships with him, visited his properties, flew on his plane, and in many cases continued their associations even after his 2008 conviction for soliciting prostitution from a minor. This wasn't ignorance. This was willful blindness at best and active complicity at worst.
What if I told you that hidden within classified documents, sealed court files, and confidential testimonies lies a network so powerful, so deeply embedded in the highest echelons of American society, that its exposure could shake the very foundations of global power. What if the names you're about to hear include presidents, princes, tech billionaires, Hollywood moguls, and some of the most influential figures who shape our world today? This isn't conspiracy theory. This isn't speculation. This is documented, verified, and terrifyingly real. Welcome to the most disturbing investigation of our lifetime, the Jeffrey Epstein Files. And I warn you, once you know what's in these documents, you'll never see the world the same way again. Before we dive deep into this rabbit hole that goes further than you could ever imagine, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what I'm about to reveal has been suppressed, censored, and actively hidden from the public eye. We're going to connect dots that powerful people never wanted connected. We're going to name names that were meant to stay buried. And we're going to expose a system of corruption that reaches into every corner of influence in America and beyond. Jeffrey Epstein. The name itself has become synonymous with everything dark and sinister in modern America. But who was he really? Born in Brooklyn, New York in 1953, Epstein's rise from a relatively modest background to becoming a billionaire financier with connections to the world's most powerful people is a story that doesn't add up, and that's exactly the point. Epstein's wealth, his properties, his influence, none of it follows a logical trajectory. He dropped out of college, taught calculus and physics at the prestigious Dalton School in Manhattan, despite lacking proper credentials, and then somehow catapulted into the world of high finance. His first major break came when he joined Bear Stearns, the investment bank, in 1976. But here's where things get strange. Epstein was fired from Bear Stearns in 1981, reportedly for violations. Yet somehow, just 1 year later, he founded his own financial management firm, J. Epstein & Company, and claimed to only work with billionaires. But no one could ever verify who his actual clients were. Former business associates, investigators, and journalists who spent years trying to trace Epstein's money have hit wall after wall. His wealth appeared almost out of nowhere, and his client list remained one of the most closely guarded secrets in finance. What we do know is that Epstein owned a private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands, known locally as Little St. James, but referred to by many as Pedophile Island. He owned a massive mansion in Manhattan, one of the largest private residences in New York City. He had estates in Palm Beach, Florida, a ranch in New Mexico, and an apartment in Paris. He owned a Boeing 727 jet, which flight logs reveal made hundreds of trips, carrying an astonishing roster of famous passengers. This wasn't just wealth, this was strategic positioning. Epstein placed himself at the intersection of power, influence, money, and secrecy. But Epstein wasn't just collecting powerful friends for social climbing. Evidence suggests he was collecting leverage. His homes were reportedly equipped with hidden cameras, recording devices in bedrooms, bathrooms, and private areas. According to testimony from victims and former employees, Epstein didn't just commit crimes, he documented them. He created an insurance policy of blackmail material on some of the most powerful men in the world. And that, more than anything else, explains why Jeffrey Epstein operated with impunity for decades. Let's talk about the connections that make this story so explosive. These aren't casual acquaintances or people who met Epstein once at a party. These are documented, repeated, and in some cases decades-long relationships with some of the most influential figures on the planet. First, let's address Prince Andrew, the Duke of York and son of Queen Elizabeth II. Court documents, photographs, and witness testimony place Prince Andrew on Epstein's island, at Epstein's mansion, and in the company of Virginia Giuffre, who testified under oath that she was trafficked to Prince Andrew when she was just 17 years old. The famous photograph of Prince Andrew with his arm around Virginia, with Ghislaine Maxwell smiling in the background, has become one of the most damning images in this entire scandal. Despite Prince Andrew's disastrous BBC interview, where he claimed he couldn't have been with Giuffre on the night in question because he was at Pizza Express in Woking, a claim that was widely mocked, and his bizarre assertion that he couldn't sweat due to an adrenaline overdose in the Falkland War, the evidence against him remained overwhelming. In 2022, Prince Andrew settled a civil lawsuit with Virginia Giuffre for an undisclosed sum, reportedly in the millions. He was stripped of his military titles and royal patronages by the Queen herself. Then there's Bill Clinton, the 42nd President of the United States. Flight logs from Epstein's private jet show Clinton flew on the Lolita Express, as it became known, at least 26 times, though some reports suggest the number could be higher. Clinton visited Epstein's private island, traveled internationally with him, and maintained a relationship with Epstein well after Epstein's first conviction for soliciting prostitution from a minor in 2008. Clinton's spokesman has repeatedly denied any knowledge of Epstein's crimes and claimed the flights were related to Clinton Foundation work in Africa. But testimony from victims, crew members, and witnesses paint a different picture, one of Clinton being fully aware of the young women who were constantly present around Epstein. The connections don't stop there. Les Wexner, the billionaire founder of Victoria's Secret and The Limited, was perhaps Epstein's most important financial connection. Wexner gave Epstein unprecedented power of attorney over his finances, allowed Epstein to live in his New York mansion, and entrusted him with managing hundreds of millions of dollars. The relationship between Wexner and Epstein has never been fully explained. How did a man with no verified financial expertise gain such total control over a billionaire's fortune? And why did Wexner, after Epstein's arrest, claim he had no knowledge of Epstein's crimes, despite their incredibly close personal and financial relationship spanning decades? Harvard professor Alan Dershowitz, the famous attorney who defended O.J. Simpson and was part of Epstein's legal defense team, has been accused by Virginia Giuffre of sexual abuse. Dershowitz vehemently denies these allegations and has sued Giuffre for defamation, while she has countersued. The legal battles continue, but what's undeniable is Dershowitz's role in securing Epstein's sweetheart plea deal in 2008, an agreement so favorable to Epstein that it has become a case study of how wealth and connections can corrupt the justice system. Kevin Spacey, the Oscar-winning actor, flew on Epstein's plane. Chris Trucker, the comedian and actor, was on the flight logs. Naomi Campbell, the supermodel, attended parties at Epstein's properties. Ehud Barak, the former Prime Minister of Israel, was photographed entering Epstein's mansion in Manhattan and later admitted to visiting Epstein numerous times, but claimed it was for business purposes related to a tech startup. And perhaps most controversially, Donald Trump. Epstein and Trump were members of the same exclusive social circles in Palm Beach and New York throughout the 1980s and 1990s. There are photographs of them together at Mar-a-Lago. In a 2002 interview with New York Magazine, Trump called Epstein a terrific guy and noted that Epstein likes beautiful women as much as I do, and many of them are on the younger side. Court documents from 2016 included allegations against Trump related to Epstein, though those allegations were later withdrawn, and Trump has categorically denied any wrongdoing. Trump's supporters point out that he banned Epstein from Mar-a-Lago, reportedly after Epstein made inappropriate advances towards a member's daughter, and that Trump was one of the only high-profile figures to cooperate with prosecutors investigating Epstein in 2009. What makes all of these connections so disturbing isn't just that these powerful men knew Epstein, it's that they maintained relationships with him, visited his properties, flew on his plane, and in many cases continued their associations even after Epstein's 2008 conviction for soliciting prostitution from a minor. This wasn't ignorance, this was willful blindness at best and active complicity at worst. One of the most disturbing and least discussed aspects of the Epstein case is the possibility that he was operating with the knowledge, approval, or even direction of intelligence agencies. This isn't baseless conspiracy theorizing. There are documented facts that suggest Epstein may have had connections to intelligence operations, either American, Israeli, or both. First, there's Alexander Acosta's statement that Epstein belonged to intelligence. While Acosta has since tried to walk back or clarify these comments, the statement was made to Trump administration officials and reported by multiple sources. If true, it would explain how Epstein received such extraordinary protection from prosecution. Second, there's the nature of Epstein's operation itself. The hidden cameras, the documentation of powerful men in compromising situations, the cultivation of relationships with politicians, scientists, and business leaders from multiple countries. This follows a classic intelligence playbook for a blackmail and influence operation. Epstein's island, his homes, his parties, they weren't just for his personal gratification. They were venues where information could be gathered and leverage could be created. Third, there's Ghislaine Maxwell's background. Her father, Robert Maxwell, was a British media mogul who had well-documented ties to Israeli intelligence, specifically Mossad. When Robert Maxwell died under mysterious circumstances in 1991, falling or being pushed off his yacht, the Israeli government gave him a state funeral attended by the country's highest officials. Multiple books and investigations have concluded that Robert Maxwell served as an Israeli intelligence asset. Did his daughter follow in his footsteps? And did she bring Jeffrey Epstein into that world? Fourth, there are Epstein's own connections to Israeli intelligence figures. Ehud Barak, the former Israeli prime minister with deep intelligence connections, was a frequent visitor to Epstein's properties. Court documents show that Barak invested in a company Epstein was involved with and visited Epstein's Manhattan mansion dozens of times. While Barak has claimed these visits were purely business-related, the frequency and nature of the relationship raise questions. Fifth, there's the question of Epstein's wealth and how he actually made his money. Despite claiming to manage money for billionaires, almost none of Epstein's supposed clients have been verified. Les Wexner is the only confirmed major client, and the financial arrangement between them has never been fully explained. Some investigators have suggested that Epstein's wealth may have come not from legitimate financial management, but from blackmail operations or payments from intelligence services. The idea, stripped down to its essentials, is this. Epstein may have operated a sophisticated blackmail operation, possibly with intelligence backing, where he would compromise powerful men and then use that leverage for various purposes: political influence, policy manipulation, business advantages, or simply to ensure his own protection. The hidden cameras in his properties, the meticulous documentation, the careful cultivation of relationships with specific individuals of strategic importance, it all fits a pattern. Is this proven? No. The U.S. government has never officially acknowledged any intelligence connection to Epstein. But the circumstantial evidence is substantial enough that serious journalists, former intelligence officials, and legal experts have raised these questions publicly. And the fact that Epstein received such extraordinary protection from prosecution, that investigations into his associates were shut down, and that powerful forces seemed to work on his behalf, all suggest that there may have been more to Jeffrey Epstein than just a wealthy pervert with connections. While Jeffrey Epstein is dead, His alleged co-conspirator and longtime associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, is alive, and her story is central to understanding the full scope of this scandal. Born in France to British media tycoon Robert Maxwell and Elizabeth Maxwell, Ghislaine grew up in extraordinary wealth and privilege. She was educated at Oxford, moved in elite social circles, and after her father's death, relocated to New York, where she met Jeffrey Epstein in the early 1990s. The relationship between Maxwell and Epstein has been described as romantic, professional, and deeply interdependent. They were a couple for several years, but even after their romantic relationship ended, Maxwell remained intimately involved in Epstein's life and, according to victims' testimony, his criminal enterprise. Prosecutors and victims describe Maxwell as far more than just a girlfriend or assistant. She was the key recruiter, the primary groomer, and in many ways the operational brain behind Epstein's trafficking network. Maxwell had something Epstein lacked: social polish, aristocratic connections, and the ability to make young women feel safe and comfortable. As a woman, she was less threatening than Epstein when approaching teenage girls. She would offer opportunities, make promises, present herself as a mentor and friend. Victims describe Maxwell as charming, intelligent, and maternal at first, which made the betrayal even more devastating when the abuse began. Multiple victims have testified that Maxwell would recruit them with promises of modeling work, educational opportunities, or massage training. She would bring them to Epstein's properties, normalize the sexualized environment, and in some cases participate in the abuse herself. Court documents include graphic descriptions of Maxwell's direct participation in sexual abuse, as well as her role in instructing other girls in how to please Epstein and his associates. After Epstein's arrest in 2019, Maxwell disappeared from public view. For nearly a year, her whereabouts were unknown, fueling speculation and conspiracy theories. The FBI launched an intensive search, and in July 2020, Maxwell was arrested on a secluded property in New Hampshire, where she had been living under an assumed name. At the time of her arrest, she had covered the property with security cameras, foil-wrapped her cell phone to avoid detection, and taken other measures to avoid capture. Maxwell's trial in late 2021 was one of the most watched legal proceedings in recent American history. The prosecution presented 4 victims who testified about Maxwell's role in their abuse when they were underage. The testimony was harrowing. Descriptions of Maxwell recruiting them, grooming them, normalizing sexual abuse, and in some cases, participating directly. The defense argued that Maxwell was being scapegoated for Epstein's crimes, that she was a victim of a witch hunt, and that the accuser's memories were unreliable. The jury didn't buy it. In December 2021, Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted on 5 of 6 counts, including sex trafficking of minors. In June 2022, she was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. The judge noted that Maxwell showed no remorse and had failed to take responsibility for her crimes. But Maxwell's conviction, while a measure of justice, also represents the closing of a door that many wanted to remain open. Throughout her trial and sentencing, Maxwell refused to provide information about Epstein's associates, refused to name names, and refused to cooperate with investigators who wanted to pursue others in Epstein's network. Some speculate this was out of loyalty or fear. Others suggest it's because she knows too much, and that naming names would put her at risk. Whatever the reason, Maxwell's silence means that the full scope of Epstein's operation and the full list of his associates and accomplices may never be known.
On August 10, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan. The official ruling was suicide by hanging. The public reaction was immediate and almost universal skepticism. Epstein didn't kill himself became an instant meme, a rallying cry, and a statement of distrust in official narratives that crossed political lines. Conservatives and liberals, Trump supporters and Trump opponents, everyone seemed to agree on one thing:
the official story of Epstein's death didn't add up. Let's examine the facts, because they are genuinely extraordinary. Epstein had been arrested on July 6, 2019, on federal charges of sex trafficking minors in Florida and New York. He was denied bail despite his lawyers offering house arrest with GPS monitoring and a $50 million bond. Epstein was housed in the Metropolitan Correctional Center's Special Housing Unit, where high-profile inmates are kept under heightened security. On July 23, 2019, Epstein was found semi-conscious in his cell with marks on his neck. This was officially ruled as a possible suicide attempt, though some reports suggested it could have been an assault. After this incident, Epstein was placed on suicide watch, which meant 24-hour observation, removal of potentially dangerous items, and frequent check-ins. However, just 6 days later, on July 29th, Epstein was taken off suicide watch and returned to his cell. This decision has never been adequately explained. Why would someone who had just attempted suicide, who was facing the rest of his life in prison, who possessed information potentially dangerous to some of the world's most powerful people, be removed from suicide watch? The night of August 9th to August 10th is when the official story becomes truly unbelievable. Epstein was supposed to have a cellmate, but his cellmate had been transferred and not replaced. Epstein was supposed to be checked on by guards every 30 minutes, but the guards allegedly fell asleep and didn't check on him for hours. The cameras outside Epstein's cell, which should have recorded anyone entering or leaving, mysteriously malfunctioned. When Epstein was discovered the next morning, he had been dead for hours. The autopsy, conducted by New York City's chief medical examiner, Dr. Barbara Sampson, ruled the death a suicide by hanging. However, Dr. Michael Baden, a forensic pathologist hired by Epstein's brother to observe the autopsy, publicly stated that the injuries to Epstein's neck were more consistent with homicidal strangulation than suicide by hanging. Specifically, Epstein had multiple broken bones in his neck, including the hyoid bone, which Baden noted was extremely unusual in suicidal hangings and more commonly found in homicidal strangulation of older victims. The official investigation into the circumstances of Epstein's death found that guards had falsified records, failed to check on Epstein as required, and that there had been a perfect storm of screw-ups that allowed Epstein to die. 2 guards were charged with falsifying records and conspiracy, but the charges were later dismissed as part of a deferred prosecution agreement. The warden of the facility was reassigned, and that was essentially the end of the official accountability. But the questions remain, and they're significant. How did someone as high profile as Epstein, with information potentially damaging to presidents, princes, and billionaires, end up dead in a federal facility under circumstances that involve multiple simultaneous security failures? The cameras malfunctioned, the guards fell asleep, the cellmate was removed, the suicide watch was lifted. Any one of these failures would be notable. All of them happening at once strains credulity. The prevailing theories fall into several categories. The official story is that Epstein, facing the prospect of spending the rest of his life in prison and being labeled as a child sex offender, took his own life at the first opportunity, and multiple security failures allowed him to do so. The second theory is that Epstein was murdered by agents of someone or multiple someones who had too much to lose if he started cooperating with prosecutors or naming names. The third theory is a variant of the second, that Epstein's death was facilitated, that he was essentially allowed to die, whether by his own hand or another's, because too many powerful people benefited from his silence. What's undeniable is that Epstein's death meant that dozens, possibly hundreds of powerful men who visited his island, flew on his plane, or were documented in his network would never face public scrutiny in a criminal trial. There would be no testimony about who did what, no parade of celebrities and politicians having to explain their relationship with a convicted sex offender, no documentary evidence presented in open court. Epstein's death closed the book on the most explosive criminal case of the 21st century. And here's perhaps the most disturbing aspect: the near total lack of curiosity from the institutions that should demand answers. The mainstream media largely moved on from the story. Congress held no serious hearings. The FBI investigation into Epstein's associates appears to have quietly wound down. With Epstein dead and Maxwell convicted but silent, the story has been allowed to fade from public consciousness, even though the fundamental questions, who else was involved, who else abused children, who facilitated this operation, remain unanswered. In late 2023 and early 2024, a bombshell dropped that reignited public interest in the Epstein case: the unsealing of court documents that included names of individuals who had been associated with Epstein or mentioned in connection with the case. The media immediately dubbed this the Epstein List, and the internet exploded with speculation about which powerful figures would be named. The reality of these documents is both more and less explosive than the hype suggested. These weren't criminal indictments. They weren't a list of co-conspirators or proven abusers. These documents came from a 2015 defamation lawsuit filed by Virginia Giuffre against Ghislaine Maxwell. As part of that lawsuit, thousands of pages of depositions, witness statements, and exhibits were collected, many of which had been sealed to protect privacy. After years of legal battles, a judge ordered many of these documents unsealed in the interest of public transparency. What the documents revealed was a sprawling network of connections. They included flight logs from Epstein's private jet, showing trips taken by Bill Clinton, Prince Andrew, Kevin Spacey, and numerous other celebrities, politicians, and business leaders. They included testimony from victims naming specific individuals who they said had abused them or witnessed abuse. They included deposition testimony from Epstein himself, from Maxwell, and from others in their orbit. They included documents showing financial transactions, property records, and communications that shed light on how Epstein's operation functioned. It's critical to understand what being named in these documents does and doesn't mean. Some people were named because they flew on Epstein's plane for legitimate purposes. Clinton's trips, for example, were documented as being related to Clinton Foundation work in Africa, though the presence of Epstein and young women on these flights raises questions. Some were named because they attended social events at Epstein's mansion, but have no allegations of wrongdoing against them. Some were named by victims as participants in abuse. The most damaging names in the documents were those directly accused by victims of sexual abuse. Prince Andrew, as mentioned, was accused by Virginia Giuffre of sexual abuse when she was 17. She testified that she was trafficked to Prince Andrew in London, New York, and on Epstein's Island. Prince Andrew denied these allegations, but has never provided a convincing explanation for his relationship with Epstein, the photograph with Giuffre, or his continued association with Epstein after his 2008 conviction. Alan Dershowitz was accused by Giuffre of sexual abuse, which he vehemently denies. The legal battle between Dershowitz and Giuffre continues, with both suing each other for defamation. Les Webner's name appeared throughout the documents, primarily in relation to his financial relationship with Epstein, and questions about how much Webner knew about Epstein's activities. But many names in the documents were more ambiguous. There were scientists who had received funding from Epstein for research projects. There were academics who had attended dinners at Epstein's mansion to discuss cosmology or artificial intelligence. There were business people who had met Epstein in professional contexts. Being in the documents doesn't automatically mean criminal activity, but it does reveal the extraordinary breadth of Epstein's network and the number of influential people who, at minimum, were willing to associate with him even after his 2008 conviction. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Epstein scandal isn't the crimes themselves, as horrific as they were, but the systematic institutional failure that allowed those crimes to continue for decades. This wasn't a failure of one prosecutor or one police department. This was a failure at every level of American society: law enforcement, media, academia, and the political system. The first police investigation into Epstein began in 2005 in Palm Beach, Florida. The The police chief, Michael Reiter, realized early on that this was an extraordinary case. He has since publicly stated that he was pressured to back off, that he was told Epstein was above his pay grade, and that powerful forces were working to shut down the investigation. Despite these pressures, local police built a strong case, identifying multiple victims and gathering substantial evidence. They presented their findings to the Palm Beach County State Attorney, Barry Krischer, who inexplicably presented the case to a grand jury in a way that resulted in minimal charges, a decision that Reiter believed was influenced by outside pressure. When the case was kicked up to federal prosecutors, it should have resulted in serious charges. Instead, we got the 2008 sweetheart deal. Alexander Acosta, the U.S. attorney who approved that deal, later admitted he was told Epstein was intelligence, but no one in the Department of Justice has ever been held accountable for that decision. No investigation was launched into who applied pressure or why the deal was so extraordinarily favorable to Epstein. The media also failed. Despite multiple reports in the early 2000s about Epstein's behavior, despite the 2008 conviction, despite the obvious questions about his wealth and connections, the mainstream media largely ignored the story. It was independent journalists, particularly Julie K. Brown of the Miami Herald, who kept the story alive and eventually forced it back into the spotlight with her groundbreaking 2018 series, Perversion of Justice. Brown's reporting directly led to Epstein's 2019 arrest. But why did it take an independent journalist to do the work that major media organizations should have been doing all along? The failure extended to the institutions that hosted Epstein and gave him legitimacy. Harvard University accepted millions in donations from Epstein and gave him an office on campus. MIT's Media Lab accepted funding from Epstein and allowed him access to researchers and students. The Council on Foreign Relations, one of the most prestigious foreign policy organizations in America, maintained Epstein as a member. These institutions provided Epstein with credibility and access, and many continued their associations even after his 2008 conviction. There's also the question of intelligence agencies and law enforcement. If Epstein was running a blackmail operation, if he was documenting crimes by powerful people, if he had hidden cameras throughout his properties, how did the FBI, the CIA, the NSA not know about this? And if they did know, why didn't they act? The lack of any serious investigation into Epstein's potential intelligence connections, despite Acosta's statements and the mountain of circumstantial evidence, suggests either incompetence or deliberate avoidance. The failure of accountability extends to the present day. Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted, but she has named no one else. No clients of Epstein's trafficking operation have been prosecuted. No one who facilitated the operation, pilots, staff, recruiters, has faced serious consequences. The two prison guards who were supposed to be watching Epstein when he died had their charges dismissed. The warden was reassigned, not fired. Compare this to how other criminal enterprises are handled. When organized crime figures are arrested, prosecutors flip lower-level criminals to get to the bosses. When drug cartels are busted, extensive investigations pursue every member of the organization. When human trafficking rings are discovered, there are sweeping arrests of everyone involved. But with Epstein, despite evidence of a decades-long trafficking operation involving dozens of victims and numerous facilitators, we got one prosecution of one person, Maxwell, and she died with his secrets. This pattern of institutional failure suggests something more than incompetence. It suggests a deliberate effort to contain the scandal, to prevent a full investigation, to protect powerful people from exposure. Whether that effort was coordinated or simply the result of multiple institutions independently deciding to look the other way, the effect is the same: a massive crime spree that went unpunished and a network of powerful predators who face no consequences. After Epstein's death, his estate established a victims' compensation fund to provide financial compensation to those who had been abused. On the surface, this seemed like a positive step, acknowledging the harm done and providing resources to help victims rebuild their lives. But the reality was more complicated, and in many ways, another injustice layered on top of the original crimes. The fund, which ultimately distributed over $121 million to approximately 135 victims, required participants to waive their right to sue Epstein's estate. This meant that victims had to choose between accepting compensation and pursuing legal accountability through the courts. For many victims, particularly those from less privileged backgrounds who needed financial assistance for therapy, medical care, or basic living expenses, this wasn't really a choice. It was financial coercion dressed up as generosity. Furthermore, the compensation fund meant that there would be no public trials where evidence could be presented, where the full scope of Epstein's crimes could be documented, where co-conspirators could be maimed in open court. Epstein's estate essentially bought silence and avoided the public accountability that trials would have provided. Some victims refused to participate in the fund specifically because they wanted their day in court. They wanted to tell their stories publicly, to have their experiences validated by a jury, to see justice done in a way that a private settlement could never provide. But with Epstein dead, their options were limited. They could sue the estate, but the estate could tie them up in litigation for years, drain their resources, and ultimately settle for less than the fund was offering. The existence of the compensation fund also highlights a fundamental inequality in how justice works in America. Jeffrey Epstein abused dozens, possibly hundreds of girls and women over decades. He trafficked them, exploited them, and profited from their abuse. He faced minimal consequences during his lifetime, 13 months in a county jail where he was allowed to leave for work release. And after his death, his estate used his wealth to buy off victims and avoid accountability. Meanwhile, the victims, many of whom have struggled with trauma, addiction, poverty, and mental health issues as a result of their abuse, got settlements that, while substantial in dollar terms, can never compensate for what was taken from them. There's also the question of Epstein's wealth and where it came from. If, as some investigators suspect, Epstein's fortune was built on blackmail rather than legitimate financial services, then the money distributed to victims through the compensation fund was itself the proceeds of crime. Victims were being compensated with money that may have been extracted through threats and extortion from the same powerful men who abused them or enabled their abuse. The irony is dark and disturbing. The compensation fund also meant that the public would never know the full scope of Epstein's crimes. Victims who accepted compensation signed non-disclosure agreements that prevented them from discussing specific terms of their settlements. While many victims have spoken publicly about their abuse, others who might have provided crucial testimony about specific individuals or events are now legally prevented from doing so. This is not justice. Justice would be a full accounting of what happened, who was involved, and consequences for everyone who participated or enabled Epstein's crimes. Instead, we got a compensation fund that bought silence, protected reputations, and allowed the powerful to escape accountability.
The Epstein scandal isn't just about one man's crimes, or even about the network of powerful men who may have participated in or enabled those crimes. It's about something much larger and more disturbing: the existence of a parallel justice system where wealth and connections place you above the law, where institutions that are supposed to protect the vulnerable instead protect the powerful, and where crimes that would destroy an ordinary person's life can be committed with impunity by those in the elite classes. Think about what the Epstein case reveals about how power actually works in America. A man with no clear source of wealth, no verified financial expertise, and a criminal conviction for sex crimes involving minors maintained relationships with presidents, princes, Nobel Prize winners, and billionaires. He owned an island where he trafficked children, and yet he was welcomed into the most exclusive circles of global society. He received a plea deal so favorable that it shocked experienced prosecutors and legal scholars.
He operated for decades despite multiple investigations, media reports, and victims coming forward. This doesn't happen by accident. This happens because systems are designed to protect the powerful and because individuals within those systems make choices to prioritize the comfort of elites over the safety of vulnerable children. Every prosecutor who gave Epstein a sweetheart deal, every police chief who was told to back off, every institution that accepted his money and gave him legitimacy, every media organization that chose not to investigate, every powerful person who maintained their friendship with a convicted sex offender, they all made choices that prioritized protecting the powerful over protecting children. The Epstein case also reveals the role of wealth in corrupting justice. Epstein's high-powered legal team included some of the most expensive and successful lawyers in America. They negotiated a deal that shouldn't have been possible. They fought every effort to unseal documents, to pursue investigations, to hold Epstein accountable. And they were effective because our justice system allows those with resources to hire armies of lawyers who can outspend, outlast, and outmaneuver prosecutors who are overworked and underfunded. There's also a deeper question about the nature of elite social networks and how they function. Epstein cultivated relationships with specific types of people, those with power, influence, or access to resources he wanted. He hosted conferences on his island about artificial intelligence and cosmology, bringing together Nobel Prize winners and tech entrepreneurs. He donated to scientific research in academic institutions. He positioned himself at the intersection of science, finance, and politics. This wasn't random social climbing, it was strategic network building. And here's what's disturbing. It worked. Epstein gained access to some of the most brilliant and accomplished people on the planet, and many of those people, even after his 2008 conviction, maintained their relationships with him. Why? Some may have been compromised and subject to blackmail. Others may have been willing to overlook his crimes because of what he could offer them: funding, connections, access. Still others may have simply operated under the assumption that the rules that apply to ordinary people don't apply to those in their social circles. The Epstein case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about institutions we're supposed to trust. Law enforcement failed. The justice system failed. The media failed. Academia failed. Every major institution that came into contact with Epstein failed to stop him, and in many cases actively enabled him. This isn't a failure of one bad actor, it's a systemic failure that reveals how corruption, wealth, and power interact to subvert justice. And perhaps most disturbingly, the case reveals how easy it is for society to move on from even the most explosive scandals when powerful people want them buried. 2 years after Epstein's death, the story had largely faded from mainstream news coverage. Most of the people named in the documents face no consequences. The questions about Epstein's intelligence connections remain unanswered. The full list of his co-conspirators remains hidden, and society has essentially accepted that we'll never get full accountability, that powerful people will continue to escape consequences, that the system is too corrupted to deliver justice. So where are the key figures in this scandal today, and what consequences, if any, have they faced? Ghislaine Maxwell is currently serving a 20-year sentence at FCI Tallahassee, a federal prison in Florida. She's scheduled for release in July 2037, when she'll be 75 years old. Maxwell has maintained her innocence and has filed appeals, though these have been unsuccessful so far. She has given no interviews, named no names, and provided no cooperation with investigators seeking information about others in Epstein's network. Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, has become a pariah in British royal circles. He was stripped of his military titles, his royal patronages, and his use of the title His Highness Royal in official capacities. He settled Virginia Giuffre's lawsuit against him for an undisclosed sum, reportedly in the millions. He has made no public appearances on behalf of the royal family since the scandal broke, and is said to be living in relative seclusion. While he faced no criminal charges, partly because the alleged abuse occurred in jurisdictions with complex legal issues, and partly because of the difficulty of prosecuting a member of the royal family, his reputation is permanently destroyed. Bill Clinton has denied any wrongdoing and any knowledge of Epstein's crimes. Despite the flight logs showing numerous trips on Epstein's plane, Clinton has maintained that these were all legitimate trips related to humanitarian work. Clinton's reputation, already complicated by his own sexual scandals during his presidency, has been further tarnished by his association with Epstein, though he faces no legal consequences. Alan Dershowitz continues to practice law and make media appearances, though his reputation has been significantly damaged by the allegations against him and his association with Epstein. He has been in ongoing legal battles with Virginia Giuffre, with both suing each other for defamation. Dershowitz has been a vocal defender of his own reputation and has argued that he is being falsely accused. Les Wexner stepped down as CEO of L Brands, which owned Victoria's Secret, in 2020. He has claimed that Epstein misappropriated vast sums of his money and that he was unaware of Epstein's crimes, though many find this claim difficult to believe given their close personal and financial relationship. Wexner faces no criminal charges, but has seen his reputation damaged and has largely withdrawn from public life. Kevin Spacey, who appeared in Epstein's flight logs, has faced multiple allegations of sexual misconduct unrelated to Epstein, which have effectively ended his acting career. He was acquitted of sexual assault charges in the UK in 2023, but remains a controversial figure. His connection to Epstein is one of many scandals that have destroyed his career. Donald Trump has denied any inappropriate relationship with Epstein and has pointed to his decision to ban Epstein from Mar-a-Lago as evidence of his distance from Epstein's crimes. His supporters argue that he was one of the few profile figures to cooperate with prosecutors investigating Epstein. His critics point to the photographs, the quotes praising Epstein, and the multiple allegations against Trump himself as evidence of a closer relationship. Trump faces no legal consequences related to Epstein. The two prison guards who were on duty when Epstein died, Tova Noel and Michael Thomas, were initially charged with falsifying records and conspiracy. However, in a controversial decision, prosecutors offered them a deferred prosecution agreement that required them to admit to falsifying records, complete community service, and cooperate with an investigation. If they comply with the terms, the charges will be dismissed. They have faced no significant consequences. The Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan, where Epstein died, was closed in 2021. The facility, which was one of the most notorious federal jails in America, was shut down in 2021, though officials claimed this was due to deteriorating conditions rather than the Epstein scandal specifically. The FBI's investigation into Epstein's co-conspirators appears to have quietly wound down. While the FBI initially pledged to pursue everyone involved in Epstein's trafficking network, there have been no additional arrests, no additional prosecutions, and no public updates on the investigation since Maxwell's conviction. The message is clear: the investigation is over, and no one else will be held accountable.
Despite all the investigations, all the media coverage, all the court documents, there are still fundamental questions about the Epstein scandal that remain unanswered. These aren't minor details. These are questions that go to the heart of what Epstein was doing, who he was working for, and how he got away with it for so long. First, where did Epstein's money really come from? We know he claimed to manage money for billionaires, but only one major client has ever been verified: Les Wexner. We know he had hundreds of millions of dollars in assets, but the source of that wealth has never been fully explained. Was it from blackmail, from payments from intelligence services, from legitimate financial management that was simply kept secret? The fact that we don't know the answer to this fundamental question is extraordinary. Second, what was Epstein's relationship with intelligence agencies? Alexander Acosta said Epstein belonged to intelligence. Multiple sources have suggested Epstein had connections to Israeli intelligence, American intelligence, or both. The structure of his operation, the hidden cameras, the documentation of powerful people in compromising situations, the strategic cultivation of relationships, all suggests intelligence tradecraft.
but no official investigation has ever been conducted into these allegations, and no government agency has ever publicly acknowledged any relationship with Epstein. Third, what happened on Epstein's island? Despite extensive testimony from victims and former employees, despite flight logs showing who visited, despite photographs and videos that were reportedly seized by the FBI, we still don't have a complete picture of what occurred on Little St. James. Who visited? What did they do? Are there recordings of these visits? If so, where are they now? The FBI has never released a comprehensive report on what they found when they raided the island. Fourth, who else was involved in recruiting and trafficking? Ghislaine Maxwell was clearly a central figure, but she didn't operate alone. There were pilots, housekeepers, assistants, schedulers, and others who facilitated Epstein's operation. Some victims have testified that they were recruited by other victims who had themselves been abused, but none of these facilitators have been prosecuted. Why not? Fifth, what happened to all the evidence? When the FBI raided Epstein's properties, they reportedly seized computers, hard drives, photographs, videos, and documents. Some of this evidence was used in Maxwell's trial, but the vast majority has never been made public. Are there recordings that could implicate other powerful people? Are there documents that would answer questions about Epstein's finances or intelligence connections? And if so, why haven't they been released or used in prosecutions? Sixth, how many victims were there really? The compensation fund paid out to approximately 135 victims, but some investigators believe the actual number could be in the hundreds or even higher. Many victims may have never come forward due to shame, fear, or the passage of time. How many young women's lives were damaged or destroyed by Epstein's operation? We'll probably never know the full answer. Seventh, who killed Jeffrey Epstein, or did he kill himself? The official ruling is suicide, but the circumstances are so suspicious that even mainstream legal experts and journalists have raised serious questions. The broken bones in his neck, the camera malfunctions, the sleeping guards, the removed cellmate, any one of these would be notable. All of them together strain belief. Will we ever get a definitive answer? Probably not, because the people with the power to conduct a thorough investigation appear to have no interest in doing so. Eighth, why has there been so little accountability? One person, Ghislaine Maxwell, has been convicted and imprisoned. That's it. Not one of Epstein's clients or associates has been prosecuted. Not one institution that enabled him has faced serious consequences. Not one government official who gave him special treatment has been held accountable. Why has the American justice system, which is capable of pursuing complex white-collar crimes and conspiracy cases, simply given up on investigating one of the most significant criminal networks in modern history? These unanswered questions are not academic curiosities. They represent a failure of accountability that has profound implications for justice and for public trust in institutions. When powerful people can commit crimes with impunity, when investigations are shut down without explanation, when evidence is sealed and hidden, it corrodes the social contract and creates a two-tiered system where the rules only apply to the powerless. The Jeffrey Epstein scandal is more than just a criminal case. It's a window into how power actually operates in 21st century America. And what we see through that window is deeply disturbing. We see that wealth can buy not just luxury, but immunity from consequences. Epstein committed serial crimes against children for decades and served a total of 13 months in a county jail with work release. Compare this to sentences handed down to people without wealth for similar crimes, life sentences, decades in prison, permanent registration as sex offenders with all the restrictions that entails. The message is clear. If you have enough money, you can quite literally get away with crimes that would destroy an ordinary person. We see that connections to powerful people provide a shield against accountability. Epstein cultivated relationships with presidents, princes, scientists, and billionaires. These relationships weren't just social, they were strategic. When investigators got too close, when prosecutors started building cases, those connections activated to protect him. Phone calls were made, pressure was applied, deals were struck. The system worked for Epstein in a way it never works for ordinary criminals because he had made himself valuable to powerful people. We see that institutions we're supposed to trust, law enforcement, the media, academia, even the intelligence community, can be compromised, corrupted, or simply willing to look the other way when the crimes are being committed by someone wealthy and connected. The Palm Beach police were told to back off. Federal prosecutors gave a sweetheart plea deal. The media ignored the story for years. Universities took his money and gave him prestige. At every level, institutions failed to do their jobs. We see that the exploitation of vulnerable children, when done by the wealthy, is treated less serious than crimes against property. Epstein stole the innocence, the dignity, and the futures of dozens of young women. He trafficked them, abused them, and in many cases damaged them psychologically for life. And yet he faced less punishment than people who commit financial fraud or drug trafficking. The implicit message is that in America's justice system, some victims matter less than others, and the children of the poor and vulnerable matter least of all. We see that the truth can be suppressed if powerful people want it suppressed. Despite court documents, despite testimony, despite investigations, we still don't know the full story of what Epstein was doing or who else was involved. Documents are sealed, witnesses are silenced, evidence disappears, and the public is expected to accept that some truths are just too dangerous to reveal, that some powerful people are just too important to expose. But perhaps most importantly, we see that the American public has lost faith in the justice system's ability to hold powerful people accountable. The phrase, "Epstein didn't kill himself," became a meme, not because people had definitive proof that he was murdered, but because they simply don't trust the official story. And that distrust is rational. The circumstances of his death were so suspicious, the failures so numerous, the convenient timing so perfect for those who would benefit from his silence, that skepticism is the only reasonable response. This erosion of trust has consequences. When people believe the system is rigged, that the powerful can commit crimes with impunity, that justice is only for those who can afford to avoid it, they lose faith in the entire social contract. They stop believing that institutions can be reformed, that voting matters, that peaceful advocacy can create change. They start looking for alternative sources of information, alternative explanations, alternative systems of accountability. The Epstein scandal feeds every conspiracy theory, justifies every skepticism, and validates every criticism of elite corruption. And the tragedy is that in this case, the conspiracy theories aren't crazy. There really was a wealthy predator with connections to the world's most powerful people. There really was a systematic cover-up. There really were institutions that failed. The crazy conspiracy theorists were closer to the truth than the people defending the official narrative.
So, where does this leave us? Jeffrey Epstein is dead. Ghislaine Maxwell is in prison. A handful of victims received compensation, and the vast majority of people involved in this scandal, the clients, the facilitators, the enablers, the powerful men who knew or should have known what was happening, face no consequences whatsoever. We're left with a system that has demonstrated it cannot or will not hold wealthy, connected predators accountable. We're left with institutions that have lost credibility and public trust. We're left with victims who will carry the scars of their abuse for the rest of their lives while their abusers live in comfort and freedom. And we're left with a massive collection of unanswered questions that will probably never be answered because the people with the power to investigate don't want the answers revealed. This isn't justice. This isn't how a functioning democracy is supposed to work. This is oligarchy, where the wealthy and connected play by different rules, where crimes against the vulnerable are overlooked in the service of protecting the powerful, where truth is subordinated to the convenience of elites.
But here's what we can do. We can refuse to forget. We can refuse to let this story fade into history as just another scandal. We can demand accountability from our institutions. We can support investigative journalists who continue to pursue this story. We can pressure our elected representatives to reopen investigations and unseal documents. We can center the victims in this narrative and remember that behind all the sensational headlines and famous names, there are real people whose lives were destroyed. We can also learn the broader lesson that the Epstein scandal teaches, that power corrupts, that wealth provides impunity, that institutions fail, and that justice is not automatic. It has to be demanded, fought for, and defended. When we become complacent, when we trust that the system will work, when we assume that powerful people will be held accountable just because they committed crimes, we create the conditions for abuse to flourish. The Jeffrey Epstein story isn't over. There are still documents that could be unsealed. There are still investigations that could be reopened. There are still powerful people who could face consequences if enough pressure is applied. But that will only happen if the public demands it, if we refuse to accept that some truths are too dangerous to know, if we insist that justice should apply equally to everyone, regardless of wealth or connections. This has been one of the most disturbing investigations I've ever conducted, and I know it's been difficult to hear, but these are truths we need to confront. These are realities we need to acknowledge, because until we do, until we force accountability for what happened, it will happen again. Different names, different places, different victims, but the same pattern of powerful predators exploiting the vulnerable, while institutions look the other way. If this video opened your eyes to the depths of this scandal, if it made you angry, if it made you want to demand accountability, then hit that like button and share this with everyone you know. This is information that powerful people would prefer remained buried, and every share is an act of resistance against that suppression. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. Do you believe Epstein killed himself? Do you think we'll ever get full accountability? What questions do you still have? And make sure you're subscribed to this channel with notifications turned on, because we're not done with this story. In upcoming videos, we're going to dive even deeper into specific aspects of this scandal, the intelligence connections, the financial mysteries, the institutional failures, and the stories of individual victims who deserve to be heard. We're going to follow the money, trace the connections, and ask the questions that mainstream media won't ask. The truth about Jeffrey Epstein and his network of powerful associates is still being suppressed, but together we can demand transparency, accountability, and justice. This isn't just about one scandal. It's about whether we live in a society where justice applies equally to everyone, or whether we've accepted a two-tiered system where the wealthy and connected are above the law. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring about truth and justice, and I'll see you in the next investigation. Remember, they want you to forget. Don't let them. Stay informed, stay angry, and stay demanding accountability. Until next time.